All right, I'm going to start by thanking Adra B for your nice contribution this week. Really appreciate it. And then I'm going to get right into welcoming everyone back and go into the question. Um, this is from D Rodman, who likes to send me questions fairly challenging and sometimes somewhat lengthy. And this one is probably no less so. And sometimes I think he's just trying to set me up. So if that's the case, David, thank you. But in this, David is referring back to a painting in his query here that I used in discussing a very recent video about finish, about oh, what is it? Well, I apologize, I can't remember the name of it. But it's about finishing a picture. And on some level, it's got that some word like finish in it. Uh, and but this is the picture that's featured on the front of that in the listing. But David is talking about this one, and I'm going to get, and he's wanting to dig in on that subject of finish. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to the question. This is where I think David is setting me up. David knows very well that when he says make it like, then make it more like. David knows what he means. I'm hoping after listening to me for a while, all you guys know pretty much what I mean. But because of what I said about this picture, again, I'll bring it back. He's saying, does that mean adding more detail? And that's what we're going to talk about for a few minutes because there's a tiny bit of clarity that could be used here. So let's talk about this part of it, though. Make it like, then make it more like. It would appear that more like means more detail. All right? More like means more detail. So when Tarbell, late in life, I don't know, it was a retrospective, a big show in any case. I think he was being featured. He was being celebrated in some way. And he said to someone, maybe in a speech, he said something like, or he gave a toast, here's to one day making one truly like. And I doubt that he meant truly more detailed than he'd been doing before. I don't have any idea that he meant to make it more photographically realistic, meant to make it more like. But I'm sure he was struggling permanently, just as the way this phrasing would make it work for students of drawing, that one of the central problems is the likeness of what's in front of you, particularly if the likeness of what's in front of you is, has a special beauty to it, and you can't make the relationships do that special beauty, right? Then that problem is, I really want to show somebody what the beauty of what I've seen, but I can't make it as like nature. I can't make it do that. I can't make it like enough. Do you see how that might be what we're talking about here? So, but that for a student, so it always means make it more accurate in a sense, means it make it more true relationally, means things like that. So and by the way, that last part, there's always room for critique, that third sentence down. That's for sure. If a student comes in and the teacher's job is to say you need more details in there, that's a never-ending battle. And this is where I know that David knows exactly what I'm talking about. You could forever correct pictures to the infinite degree of some sort of minor minutia. Again, we get back to the Degas thing, which is eminently worth repeating, that his job at the end of a painting wasn't to noodle it up and get all the details on it like a photograph. He says that's just the beginning. My job is to have the painting in harmony. And that's a relational situation, right? This to this, that to that, the harmony. And of course, the harmony of this tune that you're finding in front of you, or you're creating in your imaginative work. So what about the lettering on the book? There again, we're looking at this picture. What about the lettering on the book? What about the hands and digits on the clock? There you are, right? So let's oops, I'm going to talk about that too. So then less is more, which brings us to the artist's poetic perspective. So can you describe the goal of your example painting in a straightforward way, right? So I've already alluded to that, haven't I? So let's just go and get to this first point, though. But what about the hands on the clock, lettering on the book? So then less is more. Is it? Is less more? So less might be precisely what you want, right? Not so much more or less, but what you need, what's your, what's what. But so he's asking exactly the right question. So what is the point of the painting? And would adding letters on the clock, or hands, digits, hands, or lettering on the book, would that make it reach my point more readily? Let's look at this. So if I did have books with titles on them, this is, I think, poems by Alfred Lord Noyes. Alfred Lord? Alfred Noyes, the poet, the British poet, author of The Highwayman, if you want to have an enjoyable read. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. Beautiful sort of Romeo and Juliet kind of tragic poem. Stuff in the back, I don't remember what those are. I think that might be maybe some of the works of, I don't have them right here, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. What would that add to this picture? But as an illustrator, you would, and you're trying to write something to make a picture that is saying something about Noyes, you might put a few books around and have his name and titles on there. That's an illustrative proposition, right? But for a person who's actually operating from the beauty of light and the color play and form play and all those things as the primary issue of a painting, and that's certainly what this is for me. And by the way, you can go further. The delight in I don't want to say arranging, but configuring. I guess arranging is the right word. Curiosities to make funny shapes. I'm talking about antique store curiosities, as we call them in this country, antique stores, where you buy old things. But there's a lot. I mean, so arranging the furniture is a real thing that one does in a still life. But my mission is much more like what Amy Moore says. And again, you guys who have been asking me about the Amy Moore book, email me and I'll PDF you a copy. Okay, I'll email you a copy, PDF version of it. I have no place to send you otherwise. I'll just send it to you. I want to say, by the way, one last thing, related to that PDF stuff. I do have the Twilight of Painting in PDF form now, but we are still working on getting it into a place where you guys can just go grab it. So I can give you a link and you can just go grab it there. I'm so sorry this is taking so long. In any case, right, so, but let me make a second point, because this is the visual order way of working. It's the visual order at work. So you might even say, I don't even know when I get to the end of adding detail, like letters on hands on clocks and things like that, in the process of laying in a picture like this, but I don't have as an absolute mission that by the time I get to the end, you'll be able to read the clock. It's an absolute mission in my life. My job in here is not that kind of realism, right? So even though I'm using representation, I'm representing objects, representing the light, representing form, all these things, all those abstractions of painting. My mission isn't illustrative, and my end goal isn't the Paxton. What Gamma almost implied the Paxton end goal was, which is to have expressed fully. I'm really putting words in his mouth, and it's not fair. But it more or less comes across as fully noodling up every object in the painting. That really isn't what he's saying, but it's a lot closer when you look at the work to anything that the Boston School typically does. They have a tendency to reduce the level of data because they've already achieved the mission of the essential beauty of the magic of the light. If you want to simply put it in a way that does correspond with what Mr. Gamble talks about. He would say their subject is light. So I have again. I'm going to say again. I have a interest in a framework. A main line, counter lines, center of interest. All those things. You have all those things, but that's just the stuff. After I've set it all down, I'm not unhappy with it. And again, with Amy Moore, which I didn't follow up on that, having blurred my eyes down and like it that way as well, you begin to see the sort of the order of the progression out of the big light here to some lesser lights and spot of lights, you begin to see things like that, and you begin to see what this is essentially. But this is a color scheme, and I wanted the magic of the color scheme. It's light play, and I wanted that. But that's just words. What I take these things to be, when you look at it, the general impression is I have this sensation about it. It has these qualities that I won't stop until I get, right? Now that is coming from somewhere else. That's not coming from rules. Somebody online did that very nicely. I got a comment online recently. I like that very much. Sorry, I don't remember which one of you said it, but that is really true, that we don't really work with formula. We work from our own instincts primarily. So, but there's nothing wrong with knowing things. There's a problem with being driven by them so much so that you become a clone of words. As Gamma would say, you're drawing with words what people have told you. You're seeing with your ears what people have told you. Same thing. That was his quote. Let's go back just for a second and look at that again. So which brings us to the artist's poetic perspective. So let's get back. So now we're looking at this painting, and what I'm telling you I'm doing is I'm painting rather in the visual order. And all that means is I am allowing myself to be dominated by the major effects, by the strongest lights in a mid-tone picture, or the greatest contrasts, the most significant forms. It goes on like that, right? So if you understand that my process wouldn't take me to almost invisible hands on a clock or to words on a book till much later, and I've already accomplished my mission before I did that, why then would I proceed to write those in? Do you see what I'm saying? So I don't have a high morality about making sure you understand this book was published with Alfred Noy's name on it. And yeah, I'm not sure what else I can say to that, but I want to make it really clear that this is not an ad infinitum process if you know what the mission is. And that's why you see, and I keep showing you that Benson, which I won't show you again now, with the three girls, and you would say, this guy didn't even know how to paint like Paxton, in the sense that he couldn't noodle it up any further. There's no way in the world that's true, but there was definitely not an inclination to noodle it up further, because the aesthetic is so striking. He had reached his, he appears in this thing to accomplish his mission with so much directness and so effectively that he didn't need to keep going and get to sub-level and sub-level and sub-level of data. And by the way, when I say level of data, I just mean low contrast stuff. The hands in here are low contrast. The numbers in here, the words in here, have a hard time seeing them with my eyes. So you could argue that that's an argument for me not doing them. But low contrasts are the last things we do, hence the lost and found model of our approach. So something like this here would have come in later than something like this here, right? It would have not been a process of painting your way across this. I would have been painting spots like this and things like this and areas like this and working these up as my leading efforts, a necessity, you'd call it, of what comes first. So if people miss that, if you all miss that, you're sort of missing everything about this way of thinking. So yeah, it could be endless. If your end goal is that I got to noodle everything up, then it could be endless. But the mercy of this way of working is that, or let me say it a different way. I mean, the mercy is you will win before you ever get to that level of detail, of data. And unless you have another mission, like an illustrative mission, you won't be putting in Alfred Noy's name on that book. What was I going to say? But there's no limit to how far you can go with data. So you could say, by the time I've drawn some of these little teensy things here that have low contrast, maybe I should have drawn these, just to remain within the unity of the general impression. That's the kind of thing I try to maintain a sense about. I try to make sure that the level of data, that finally when I reach such and such a contrast, like maybe this low contrast here, that every place it happens, it also exists in the painting. and I haven't neglected it because it's that next level of data that I want to also be unified within itself. There's nothing absolute about it except the painting won't deliver the same sense of unity. It won't harmonize as a visual impression if you start that off artificially, if you have all sorts of sub-detail in the middle of places that don't, and nowhere else, in certain places, nowhere else. So I don't know how much more to say about that. David, I'm going to look at your question again, but I want to just make sure that people understand on the first wave of what we're doing here, that this that what you're saying is an absolute. We do not have an interest in those things, the lettering on the clock. We don't have an interest in noodling to the nth degree. Somebody again asked me what noodling was. It just means modeling to me. It means just modeling the nth degree of detail, or just modeling by the details. That's sort of my thinking about what noodling is. I use it in different ways, though. So even translating myself, I might at times just, you know, try to use it differently. But it always implies a sort of a fine playing around little areas and not broad thinking about everything at once. A piece of that goes with the way I use it frequently. So I try to explain the goal, if you want to call it that, in a straightforward way. So my point to you, David, is that I shouldn't have to explain the goal. What you see is the goal if I achieve my mission. So you could say it's just the visual impression of this phenomenon in space. It just excited me, and I'm just delivering, you know. So, but you can look at it and see what excited me in little ways, or you can just say, look at the general thing and say that's amusing. And I'm kind of like that about painting in general. I'm not into this other level of stuff. It doesn't mean I want to say of subjective and poetic and all that sort of stuff. I'm interested in all those things, but I'm not interested in them in every picture or in the same way in every picture. That's getting probably too far afield, but it is clear to me. I'm very pleased. For example, I really wanted the center of this picture to be abundant in form, to be wonderfully busy. And when I saw it in nature, it just had this sort of magical life right in the middle of it, and that's a big deal, you know. So. What else can I say? I don't even know what to say except the general impression amused me, the great sweep of it, you know. So keep remembering that my mission is not that of a realist in the sense of I'm trying to convince you that I can noodle things up. As a student, you may want to be, your teacher may want, in fact, I rather want my students to convince me that they could noodle up anything to the nth degree and not lose the unity. It's true. That's like this curious high water mark of skill, but virtually no painters actually do that. And the reasons aren't because it's tiring, although that'd be a really good reason all by itself, exhausting, I should say. But the reason is because they know what the central mission is. So it's always the general impression and the magic of the general impression. Was there a reason I put the clock there at all? No, it's just a piece of Delftware. Thank you, Cheryl. That Cheryl donated to me way back when, or left in the studio for us. And I've never had an opportunity to use it. I don't think I've ever had that chance. So I was looking for Delft type materials. There's a Delft little thing down here. So that's what I did. I picked up some Delft stuff. And then at some point along the way there, I had an idea about lighting things rather on a triangular basis a little bit. But this is not an overt and aggressive attempt to do a Vermeer or anything like that. Just Delftware and sort of those things. And this kind of lighting, what's more amusing than the Delftware? I mean, or gratifying, satisfying than the way Vermeer sees the light and handles the light in full color, lost and found, sort of edges and all the rest of that stuff. So, but yeah, that's one of those things, though. I'm not so sure you, even on your own pictures, are wanting to actually label it in such a way. But I do recommend students in such a way that you're forced to then abide by that. I've mentioned to you before the portrait of Chloe, and originally I had an hourglass model, big dark bottom and a big spreading hat, so it had a feeling of an hourglass. And then I realized it had the complexity of it required it to be more of a DNA thing. So it was the spiraling thing that had offshoots coming out of it. Well, that's an evolution, a linear gestural evolution of the painting, right? So and for me, in other words, I was trying to grasp more fully. And sometimes a word like DNA, the DNA molecule symbol, whatever that is, something like that, because it's visual, might give you a handle on what you've got here. So to that degree, it's useful to name it. And I do recommend students, when they look at a passage, say take a passage like this, where there's something about this, what would you call that? Is that just a juicy backlight? I mean, but you give it some sort of a name so that you will hold on to it and work it until it has that quality. So I do give it a name, but that's not the name of the whole thing. I'm not sure I could even tell you that. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? All right. So David had other points. Let's see. You explained the unity of your painting in its consistent lack of detail. So what about paintings with more detail? Yeah. So the more detail everywhere, right? That's how I'm talking about it in relation to unity. But I'm thinking of the Paxton, that's actually DeCamp. I think you mean, David, probably, right? You know the stuff too well. I'm thinking of the painting the blue cup, effect of colored light and dark shapes within a rectangle, in so much as most people would recognize that environment as painted. Now I'm putting David's thing in two statements here, but I'm just going to go to that one. So again, what the blue cup? There's a story that goes to the blue cup. Apparently, there's a certain kind of china. I think it was china. It had a certain kind of a mark in it that you could only see if you held it up to the light. But it was a mark that was invisible otherwise. But that was how you could tell it was the real thing. This really costly, shall we say, uh, 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 china or whichever it was, dinnerware. So she's looking up at the blue cup. I'm sure he had an idea of a kitchen picture. He might have gotten it from Paxton. Paxton was constantly doing sort of servants, and some of that stuff, of course, goes with the Dutch, genre stuff. So where his ideas come from, but what he's doing is he's got a table full of junk, and he's thinking of a kitchen picture. He could have had her dusting anything, but in the course of it, this young model may have picked up that cup and started looking at the light. Maybe he even explained it to her. And she started doing it, and there was this magic. And that I think is where you're going to find these guys live. They live in the West. Otherwise, they wouldn't have accomplished it. You can see plenty of illustrative pictures of a girl looking at a cup. At that point, who knows what you might do to prove that that cup is the genuine article. But DeCamp is fascinating at moving lights, for example, down the face and through the body. You can see that the lights are warmer up here on the dress and cooler down here. It's characteristic of a studio with a building across the street where you'll get it warmer down here, cooler down here because of the bouncing light off that building. And he did that a number of times. That may have been his fascination with something like this. Certainly was it became a mission to make sure that he accomplished the finesse of that travel of light. But no, I wouldn't put any of these in that class of other kinds of, again, look at your question. The blue cup effect, I'm thinking, so it's consistent lack of detail. So what about paintings with more detail? I don't know if that's a good example because that probably has no more detail than mine. But what you can see, so let's look at it. What you can see in the question of detail is how much he's left out. So there are a lot of areas, like half of this thing is missing. This pot here is hard to find. It's hard to find this. So he's, again, painting in the visual order. His eyes are blurred, and he's deciding what to do on that basis. And at a certain point, he's got way more than enough data to get his visual and the intrigue onto the canvas. Now, again, his visual intrigue is the impression taken as a whole. Everything from distribution of colors to the travel of light to form and other kinds of patterns. But we are, as impressionists, we're so frequently just struck. And that's the beauty of having a model in the room. You want to look at the model until you're struck, not by the fact that it says something about a blue cup, but that it's actually generating this visual wonderfulness. And as it relates to light and color movement, all those things. But there is nothing about this that's particularly more detailed than mine. In fact, it may even be slightly less so. It's maybe slightly harder edged in certain places and things like that. But that look is that's giving you a pretty good idea. Now, I know there are a lot of counts in through here. He's doing a lot of little stuff, but it looks like he's staying away from minor contrasts. He doesn't get into an area like this and then draw every little tiny thing in a little way. But every major contrast, he's working hard at things like this. If you come down here and this, you're going to have to draw this because this is a completely separate. You can't just smear that into that. Whereas you can here, whatever the pattern is on here is actually becoming part of the table frequently. You can do that, and you will do that. So this would be that low level of detail where you're really saying, I'm not talking, I'm not saying much here. Low level of stuff. So he's implying a busyness here, but he's not in there carefully articulating that stuff as if he's got some conscience about drawing everything, because he certainly doesn't. He has a conscience, you might say, about drawing significant things and getting out when the essential magic has been expressed. That's putting words in a painter's mouth, but I only know it because I know those words. Okay, so I actually didn't want to do more with that. I think that's where I'm going to stop. I hope that comes across to you guys okay. Again, thank you, Adra, for that nice donation. And thank you, David, for that question, that point of discussion. And I think we better leave it at that. I hope I want to say, let me end this with this because I often do add a little bit at the end, but this is 350 of these things. It's almost what you call a daily devotion for a year. You watch one of these for a year. And you're totally brainwashed or what? But I do hope that it gets across to you this whole other idea of thinking, the way we do think. It's really magical stuff. And the thing that makes it so good, though, is that it stays visual. And it's all about the visual interplay and magic, no matter what the subject is. And that's one of those things where the illustrator has to face the idea that there are times when he will do things that he wouldn't do if he was a pure visual player, and that's one of those differences, which happens to fit a lot of old paintings. Thank you all for sharing, commenting, liking, especially is good, and subscribing. I think we're up to 13,000 subscribers, according to Mr. Producer, and it really is time, as he said, for us to do another live show. So I've been teasing you for 2 or 3 weeks. I've got to get him scheduled that, as well as a visit with Mr. Dunley again, which some of you seem to have enjoyed. All right. Again, thank you, and see you next time.